Welcome back, movie buffs. Today, we are diving into the 2026 movie Project Hail Mary. But before we begin, don't forget to hit subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss any of our heart-pounding movie breakdowns. Grace wakes up in a strange medical bed with a robot hovering over him, scanning his body and checking his condition. Confused and terrified, he tries to crawl away but the machine pulls him back. After struggling for a moment, he finally frees himself and demands to know where he is. Looking around, he spots a ladder and climbs upward, only to discover several other people lying unconscious nearby. Grace tells the system to turn the ship around and return to Earth, but the system explains that Earth is 11 years away. Slowly, fragments of his memory begin returning to him. In one memory, news reports discuss fears that the sun is dying. Grace remembers his old life as a middle school science teacher standing in front of a classroom. One of his students asks him about something called the Petrova line. At first, Grace avoids the question, but eventually explains that 2 years earlier, a radio telescope enthusiast named Irina Petrova discovered a strange infrared trail stretching from the sun toward Venus. Scientists later named it the Petrova line. Grace explains it in simple terms by saying tiny organisms are feeding on the sun's energy little by little. The students panic, worried that Earth could die within 20 years, but Grace reassures them that the world's smartest people are already trying to solve the problem. Back in the present, Grace trims his beard and begins cleaning up the ship while trying to understand who he is and what happened. Another flashback takes him back to his school office, where a woman named Eva arrives looking for him. She introduces herself as someone connected to an important research project. Eva shows Grace an old scientific paper he once wrote arguing that water might not actually be necessary for life to evolve. She asks if he still stands by what he wrote. Embarrassed, Grace admits he was practically fired for standing by what he wrote and tries to leave. Eva follows him and explains that they need help studying the mysterious organisms feeding on the sun. Eventually, Grace agrees and joins the research team. At the research facility, he is suited up and taken into a secure lab where scientists are studying the strange space organisms. Grace examines one closely and eventually realizes it is a cell. Excited, he begins running experiments to figure out what it is made of. At first, everyone celebrates his breakthrough, but the sample suddenly dies. Grace continues testing and discovers the organism is mainly made of oxygen, hydrogen, and carbon. Outside the lab, he sits feeling disappointed because his theory turned out to be partly wrong. Eva joins him and confirms that the organisms really are feeding on the sun's energy. She then asks why they seem connected to Venus. Grace admits he has no idea. Eva tells him there are hundreds of experts trying to answer that exact question before walking away. But Grace stops her and says he wants to continue helping. Eva leaves him with 3 samples to study and reminds him that the entire world is depending on the research. Grace throws himself into the work while a man named Carl keeps an eye on him. Together, they gather equipment and decide to recreate the conditions found on Venus to see how the organisms react. After many experiments, Grace finally succeeds. In a dark room, he creates the exact environment needed, and one of the organisms reproduces. Grace immediately calls Eva and excitedly tells her that she has discovered how the astrophage breeds. Eva rushes him into a room packed with scientists and researchers, where Grace explains his findings. During the presentation, one researcher suddenly asks how long it would take to produce 2 million kilograms of astrophage. Grace is confused and asks why they would ever need that much. Another scientist then reveals that Grace does not actually have the clearance to know the full truth about the project. Eva steps forward and officially grants him top-secret clearance to Project Hail Mary. Grace stands there completely confused, realizing there is far more happening than he ever imagined. Grace eventually learns the terrifying truth. The sun is not the only star dying. Many nearby stars are fading as well, except for one called Tau Ceti, located almost 12 light-years away. Scientists believe the answer to saving Earth can be found there. Because of that, the world has decided to build a ship and send a crew to investigate. The biggest problem was fuel, but the astrophage solved that issue. If they could produce enough of it, the ship would have enough fuel to reach Tau Ceti. Still, there was a catch. There would not be enough fuel for the astronauts to return home. Instead, they would send their discoveries back to Earth using probes while they themselves remain stranded in space. It is presented as humanity's only chance to survive instead of waiting for Earth to slowly die. Back on the ship, Grace looks at the bodies of the dead astronauts beside him. Quietly, he marks their names and promises that he will finish the mission for all of them. With sadness, he releases their bodies into space. Later, he relaxes inside the virtual reality room, trying to clear his mind, when suddenly an alarm begins blaring through the ship. One of the engines has shut down. Gravity disappears instantly, and Grace is thrown into confusion as objects begin floating around him. He manages to grab onto a monitor showing the view outside the ship. Taetti is nearby, and unlike the dying stars, its betrothal line is still bright and healthy. Then Grace notices something strange. The line seems to stop near a mysterious object floating in space. At that moment, the computer announces, "Blip A detected." Grace looks outside and sees an enormous ship-like object drifting nearby. It is unlike anything human. Nervously, he steers his ship away from it, but the alien vessel moves too, almost as if it is following him. Every time Grace changes direction, the strange ship mirrors him. Eventually, he stops moving and the alien ship suddenly launches something toward him. Terrified, Grace ducks and covers his ears, convinced it is some kind of bomb. But instead of exploding, the object simply bounces off his ship and floats away. Not long after, another object arrives from the alien vessel. This one is slightly different. As Grace examines it, he suddenly notices several long mechanical poles extending from the alien ship toward his own. The two ships slowly connect together, separated only by a strange transparent barrier. Curious and nervous, Grace opens the bay door and discovers that a tunnel has formed between the ships. He cautiously steps inside and slowly walks forward through the passage until he suddenly comes across a large mysterious block waiting in the middle of the tunnel. Grace carefully taps the strange block in front of him, but suddenly something moves on the other side and scares him badly. Startled, he stumbles back before calming himself enough to look properly. He sees what looks like a rocky arm tapping against the glass barrier. The alien then holds up a small human-shaped figure beside a model of Grace's ship, trying to communicate that Grace should return to his side. Understanding the message, Grace heads back to his ship. Soon after, the tunnel disconnects and the alien ship moves away, only to reconnect again at a different bay door. This time, Grace prepares more carefully. He grabs scientific instruments, depressurizes the area, and steps outside once more. As he approaches the glass barrier, the alien finally reveals itself fully. It moves like a giant spider made of rock, crawling across the surface before placing one of its limbs against the glass. The sight terrifies Grace at first, but when he reacts in fear, the creature jumps back too. After a moment, Grace realizes something important. The alien is copying his actions. When Grace laughs nervously, the alien copies the laugh too. Curious now, Grace studies the creature more closely, trying to find its face or eyes, but he cannot figure out where any of them are. The alien then points toward one of the objects it threw into Grace's ship earlier. Grace brings it closer, and the alien repeatedly gestures toward his helmet. After several failed attempts to understand each other, Grace finally realizes what the alien wants. It is asking him to remove his helmet. At first, Grace refuses. He slowly backs away, nervous that the air might kill him. But the alien calmly nods, almost reassuring him. Gathering all his courage, Grace removes his helmet and is shocked to discover he can breathe perfectly fine. Wanting a better way to communicate, Grace eventually brings in a computer and uses software designed for alien language translation. Slowly, the two finally begin understanding each other. Rocky points at the astrophage and calls it bad. He explains that he came from a planet called Arid and that there were originally 23 Iridians aboard his ship. Every single one of them died except him. Grace quietly admits that the same thing happened on his mission too. Realizing they are both alone, Rocky tells Grace that they will save their stars together. The two share a fist bump through the barrier. As they continue working side by side, Grace tells Rocky more about his life back on Earth. Rocky becomes confused and asks why a school teacher was sent into space. Grace avoids giving a direct answer and instead helps Rocky choose a voice for the translation software. Together, they test different options until they finally find one that fits him perfectly. Suddenly, the ship detects movement. Grace looks around and realizes Rocky has entered his side of the ship. Rocky becomes excited after discovering he can survive in Grace's atmosphere and immediately starts running through the entire ship while Grace desperately tries to stop him. Rocky complains nonstop about how messy the ship is. Grace eventually calms him down and tries teaching him about personal boundaries, but Rocky ignores him and starts searching for his bedroom instead. Together, the two begin forming a plan. They decide to travel to the planet where the astrophage reproduce, collect samples, and figure out why the organisms are no longer feeding on Taetti. Grace prepares the ship for the journey while the computer announces it will take 11 days to arrive. Grace and Rocky finally arrive at the planet. Afterwards, Grace returns with samples from the planet and begins comparing them with the astrophage from Earth. Grace studies the sample carefully and realizes the astrophage are refusing to leave the planet for a reason. As he examines it further, he discovers signs of microscopic life. They are not just dealing with astrophage anymore. There are actually bacteria living on Adrian. Both Grace and Rocky are stunned by the discovery. It proves there is real life on the planet. Rocky freaks out as he realizes something even more important. The tiny organisms on Adrian are killing the astrophage like predators hunting prey. If they can take those organisms back home, they might be able to save both of their stars. The problem is that the dangerous bacteria live deep within Adrian's clouds, and neither ship can safely reach the planet's surface. Rocky suggests building a long chain system that could lower a collection bucket into the clouds. Still, both of them know Grace is not a trained pilot, so Rocky patiently teaches him what to do. During their conversations, Grace explains his plan to send the bacteria back to Earth using probes. Rocky becomes confused and asks why Grace will not return home with them. Grace quietly explains that there is not enough fuel for a return trip. He says he still has enough food for a few years, but eventually he will die alone in space. Rocky refuses to accept that answer. He insists Grace must go home. Grace tries to act calm and says he has already made peace with it, but Rocky can tell he is lying. Rocky explains that he can give Grace 2 million kilograms of astrophage fuel from his own ship, enough to send him home. The downside is that Rocky would arrive back at his planet 6 years later than planned. Rocky says he already failed to save his crew once and refuses to let another friend die too. At that moment, Grace finally breaks down and admits the truth. He never really accepted his fate. Through tears he thanks Rocky for caring. Grace hugs him tightly, which startles Rocky at first, but after a moment Rocky slowly hugs him back. In another memory, Grace stands with Eva shortly before launch day. They talk quietly together when suddenly an explosion erupts nearby, shaking the entire launch area. Back in the present, Grace pilots the small satellite vessel toward Adrian's clouds. The craft shakes violently as they descend. Once they reach the right altitude, they lower the collection bucket using Rocky's chain system. The bucket successfully gathers samples of the bacteria, and Grace heads outside to retrieve it. As he works, he notices flames starting to appear on the outside of the satellite. Warning alarms immediately begin going off. The ship starts losing altitude and slowly sinks deeper into the planet's atmosphere. Suddenly, debris crashes into Grace and nearly knocks him away while the bucket dangles below him. More warnings flash across the system about dangerously high temperatures. Grace prepares to risk everything to retrieve the sample, but Rocky desperately tells him to stop. Rocky says they can always try again later and that no sample is worth Grace losing his life. Grace ignores Rocky's warning because he believes they may not get another chance. He pushes forward, grabs the bucket, and ends up hanging from the chain deep inside the dangerous clouds. With little time left, he cuts the chain loose, swings himself upward and throws the bucket back toward the ship. Somehow he manages to climb back inside and take the pilot's seat. He powers up the engines and the satellite finally begins rising again. Warning alarms continue blasting across the ship as the hull pressure keeps dropping. They barely escape the atmosphere, but the fuel tank has been badly damaged and is leaking. Grace manages to eject the tank before it explodes, but the impact knocks him unconscious. Rocky suddenly breaks out of his protective shell and rushes to save him. He drags Grace to safety and places an oxygen mask over him. But in doing so, Rocky exposes himself to the harmful atmosphere and slowly begins weakening. Back in Grace's memories, the earlier explosion had killed one of the astronauts chosen for the mission. The team urgently needs a replacement. Grace is confused at first until he notices everyone staring at him. He immediately refuses, saying he is not an astronaut. Eva calmly tells him they do not need an astronaut. They need the world's top expert on astrophage, and that is him. Grace panics and says he cannot do it. Everyone around him insists he can. Realizing what they are truly asking, Grace says they want him to give up his life. Eva quietly answers yes and tells him he has 3 hours to decide. Back in the present, Grace wakes up on the ship and realizes Rocky is missing. Following a trail of carbon, he eventually finds Rocky weak and slowly dying. Later, Grace records another journal entry, admitting he no longer knows what to do. The mission is technically complete, but Rocky gave up before reaching home. Grace extracts the bacteria and successfully proves that they kill the astrophage. While recording his thoughts, he complains sadly that Rocky abandoned their plan too soon. Eventually, Grace falls asleep. When he wakes up, he hears tapping nearby. To his surprise, Rocky is alive again inside his shell. Overjoyed, Grace immediately hugs him. he excitedly shows Rocky the room filled with bacteria samples, proving their discovery worked. The two celebrate together inside the virtual reality room. In another memory, Grace finally goes to Eva's office and tells her he cannot join the mission. He admits he is too afraid and does not have the courage to die in space. Eva tries explaining how important the mission is, but Grace has already made up his mind and tries to leave. However, Eva refuses to let him walk away. A doctor enters the room while Eva tells Grace that history will remember him as a hero. Realizing what is happening, Grace tries to run, but security surrounds him. He manages to escape outside for a moment before being caught, restrained, and knocked unconscious. Grace finally remembers everything while traveling through space. With the mission complete, he prepares to return to Earth and says goodbye to Rocky. Rocky responds with their special farewell gesture before moving back and disconnecting the connector between their ships. Slowly, the two ships drift apart while both of them raise a thumbs up to each other one last time. The computer informs Grace that the journey back to Earth will take 4 years. As he travels alone, Grace dreams about all the moments from his past and everything he has been through. Suddenly, an alarm wakes him up. The system warns him about contamination inside the ship. Grace investigates and discovers a terrible problem. The bacteria they collected have started eating through the xenonite material used to build the ship itself. Horrified, Grace realizes the same thing will eventually happen to Rocky's ship too. Rocky's entire ship is built with xenonite, meaning Rocky will run out of resources and die slowly and painfully. Grace runs the calculations and realizes he only has 2 options. He can continue home to Earth or he can turn back and save Rocky. After thinking about it, Grace makes his decision. He packs all of his research, discoveries, and journal recordings into probes and sends them toward Earth. Then he changes course and heads back for Rocky's ship. When he finally reaches it, he sees a huge glass barrier separating them. Grace bangs desperately against it until Rocky eventually appears. The moment they see each other again, they happily embrace. Back on Earth, Grace's probes finally arrive. Eva reviews his journals and receives a small gift he left behind. Humanity now has the information needed to save the planet, meaning the mission succeeded. Later on, Grace wakes up to another alarm, but this time he is no longer alone in space. He has built a new home on Rocky's planet. Rocky arrives at his door and together they head out toward the beach. Rocky mentions that their scientists are already preparing a ship that could one day send Grace back to Earth. Grace says he will think about it. By now, he has become a teacher again, spending his days teaching Rocky's people. That's a wrap on our breakdown of the 2026 movie, Project Hail Mary. What do you think about this movie? Drop your thoughts and reactions in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. If you enjoyed this recap, make sure to hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss one of our thrilling movie analyses and deep dives. Thanks for watching, and until next time, stay tuned for more edge of your seat content.